This is our presentation on exploring the solar production and electric vehicle use on campus. So first I'm going to kind of run through our slides. We've set this up so that we've done many different calculations and used many different sheets, but we wanted to compile it all in one place so that this presentation can be used in the future for whatever proposals may be continued and continuously edited and used again. So this will just be like an overview of the presentation that we've done, but if you have any questions about the way that it's set up or the spreadsheets or the way that we got our numbers, we'll be happy to have questions about that in the end and kind of go more in detail with this. So to start out, we have kind of a summary slide on our Bryn Mawr College sustainability goals. Now, I'll kind of just do this briefly because I know many of you are already familiar with the sustainability goals, but basically what we're focusing on in this presentation is achieving carbon neutrality. And right now, Bryn Mawr College gets 100% of purchased electricity offset by wind power, which is a really great accomplishment. And we're looking at the ways that we might be able to transition away from these offsets to our own production on site, which we'll kind of talk about why that's important throughout the presentation. We have about 2 years left on our wind contract, so this is kind of an ideal time to be looking back at that, seeing if that's the direction we want to continue or whether we kind of want to shift to more of our on-site production. So one of the things we talked about in our 360 course was the philosophy behind our use of different technologies. And so we wanted to look at why these strategies. So today we're focusing on the potential for solar production and changing our transportation fleet to electric vehicles. So we had a Bryn Mawr community meeting. I'm sure many of you are aware, and many of you attended earlier this semester, where the community came together and gave some feedback on the categories of action and the directions that we want to go in. So the results of this meeting were that a lot of the community members wanted to invest in moving away from offsets, but doing as local action as possible, including offsetting through local energy production, and also looking at the effectiveness and the unintended consequences of our solutions. So part of this goes into a lot of what we've talked about in class, is this idea of utilitarianism and what's the most useful and what's the most effective, and also keeping things local and keeping it within like the visible realm of action. So one of the benefits of solar production and electric vehicle usage is that it's on site, it's local, just about as local as you can get, and it's really visible. So the community feels like they're really involved in this. It's also, again, you can see it, and there aren't as many unintended consequences as, you know, if you were trading different credits and emissions. And so that kind of goes into this idea of utility, as we really want to be able to see the direct impacts of what we're doing. So the next part of this is going to be policy framework, and Kyla, I'll let you take it away. I can't hear you.
Sorry.
That's okay. Do you want me to stop sharing and then, or would you like me to just continue clicking through?
I was going to say, if it might be easier if you continue, if that's okay with you.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, yeah, so the rest of our project after me is going to be specific strategies that we can use and implement on campus with regards to a certain specific sustainable energy initiatives. So this policy framework is really just to undergird that. I'll be talking about a couple of federal policies and a couple of state policies, including some with recent changes. And to Zoe's point, I know folks in facilities probably are already aware of several of these changes, but this presentation hopefully will just have a compiled overview of that. And of course, yeah, that's what we'll be doing. So we can move to the next slide. So the first issue that we'll be looking at is a recent national case. PJM is the grid that Bryn Mawr is on. PJM actually covers all of these states right here, at least parts of them. So it's a pretty big grid. And recently, they had a case brought before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with regards to how sort of the prices at which energy is sold. So we can head to the next slide. Thanks, Zoe. Oh, sorry, that won't be. Thank you. So basically, energy grid, including PJM, sell the energy. They sell energy capacities in capacity markets. So the capacity is the amount of energy that the grid expects it will need to use within a given year. And they sell them about 3 years out, which means that ordinarily, like in the 2020 year, PJM would be having its capacity auction for like the 2022-2023 year. And the cases that were brought before the FERC basically have to do with if a state is giving subsidies to certain energy makers, whether those, like if those energy makers can bid as low as they want to in order to buy into these capacity commitments. So we can switch to the next slide. Thanks. So after the FERC made this new decision within Pennsylvania and within PJM, now all state subsidized resources are subject to price floors, whereas previously only natural gas resources were. So what this basically means is that existing renewable energy resources which receive state subsidies are sort of grandfathered in. They can still bid however they would like to, but after the beginning of this year, any new producers of renewable energy or any energies that are receiving state subsidies, which are mostly renewable energies, are subject to these price floors. So all of that in short is going to change the prices of energy within the PJM grid. Probably we're looking at in a couple of years. So actually, to Zoe's point with our contract ending, this is a perfect time to look at ways that we can produce more energy on campus so that we don't have to pay for energy at higher prices coming off the grid, especially from renewable energies, as we already do with wind energy. So you can move on to the next slide. This is a change to the Pennsylvania energy law, which could affect Bryn Mawr circumstantially. Basically, the AEPS, the Energy Portfolio Standards, were created in 2004 with the goal of all electric generation suppliers and distribution companies supplying 18% of their energy through alternative energy sources by 2020. And then in 2017, Pennsylvania changed, there's subsections of that 18% that are allocated to various different types of alternative energy resources. And so they stipulated in 2017 that the state stipulated that solar voltaic energy must be produced in state as opposed to just in the general PJM territory. So what this means for Bryn Mawr potentially is that I know we're currently not looking on putting energy on the grid, but if that ever changed in the future, we could potentially be eligible for alternative energy credits and specifically solar alternative energy credits based on the amount of electricity that we could produce. So it's just something to keep in mind if that's a change that would be relevant in the future. Some other Pennsylvania and federal incentives for renewable energy include a couple of PICO energy grants, and we could well be participating in some of these already as well. But these are pretty, the first two here are pretty broad overreaching categories. You can see that they touch on a variety of things. So there's a lot of little ways in which we can get rebates. Net metering is another thing that we could potentially participate in if we decide to put energy on the grid during emergencies, or if we have a microgrid in place to maintain critical infrastructure. And that's another rebate program. and there's more information on these slides, so I won't get too much into that. The federal renewable energy tax credits, again, sort of emphasize that 2-year window. Basically, through the end of 2021, we are eligible by putting, well, we'll talk about putting solar energy on campus, but by putting renewable energy on campus and producing it ourselves, we're eligible for these tax credits from the federal government. And I know COVID is probably messing with a lot of this. If we've been able, and if we are able to implement some of these measures and put in the infrastructure by the end of this year, we have the potential to get this higher tax credit, the 26% tax credit, which would be amazing. But the end of 2021 is really the hard deadline with that one. And of course, that's lines up pretty well with when our wind energy offset expire and need to be renewed anyway, so that's a great time to readjust there. And then Kim is going to talk about this last one here during her part of the presentation, but Pennsylvania offers incentive grants for creating public electric vehicle charging stations, and that's super easy to do. If we decide to get an electric vehicle fleet, we'll need to charge some ourselves, and all we have to do is make the electric vehicle charging station public, I believe for 80 hours a week. Kim will talk about this, but that will allow us to qualify for this Pennsylvania grant, so that can cheapen that cost. Thank you, Sarah.
So I guess this slide is just stating, our big question, which is what is the potential for decreasing Bryn Mawr's carbon footprint through solar generation and the use of electric vehicles. So next we're gonna go to solar, which is Menna's portion. So take it away, Menna.
Okay, so basically I tried to get a rough estimate of roof areas on the 5 buildings we are assessing. I only focused on these, although I did a small, very rough estimate for parking lot and the new health center. So basically the solar intensity, we evaluated these values based on the 32% due to morning and afternoon variance, and we also reduced the values by 40%, estimating factoring these for clouds. I used two specific solar panels for our calculations that I will show you later. If you could please go to the next slide. Yeah, so these are the estimated roof areas for these buildings. I did a previous calculation that had a lot bigger values, but then I redid the calculations for a more realistic estimation because I had to consider that the solar panels wouldn't be able to fit in any area. So I had to lower my estimations. So if you think that these are really pretty small values, I thought that I have to only consider spacious places or in spacious areas for the solar panels. If you can go to the next one. So we did our calculations based on what we learned in the math and sustainability class. However, I used the NREL value of 4 kWh per meter square to get the more accurate values. These are the listed values. These are the pure solar potential, not considering the solar value capacity factor. So if you can go to the next one. So I talked with Jeremy with us in the presentation about what kind of solar panels we would think about, and from his directions, we thought about that word building, the facilities building, would be a great fit for commercial use panels, and Hanawa Q was one of the proposed and really known solar cells for commercial use, and it has a relatively low efficiency of 19.9 and low cost. However, when I did my calculation, I went to a more pessimistic and realistic estimation, and I did the calculations based on 10%, not 19%. So I only used Hanwha Q for my calculations for the board building. Go to the next one. The other buildings had less potential for solar values. So after my talk with Jeremy, I thought that maybe using sun power, which is has a higher efficiency and is more of a residential used, and it's relatively more expensive. So using sun power solar panels could be more fit for the other buildings, the Thorne School, Erdman, New Dorm, and also not the Park and Health Center are for the commercial one, and also yeah, Cambrian Row. So go to the next one. So if you look here, we will find that the fiscal year 2019 electrical consumption, these are the values we had from the facilities. On the right side, I have my estimations. I had 10% for the commercial panels, Hanwha Q, and these are used for ward building. The others, however, I used 12%, and it's for the residential sun power solar panels. And these values are, like, as you can see, are making offset like relatively low, 12 and 8 values, but I can see that ward building has a really good potential for solar panels of 51% offset for the total electricity consumption. Go to the next one. When we talked with facilities, they had in their mind that maybe putting solar panels for lighting is what we want to do. So I also did the estimation thinking of how we could offset only lighting. And based on the information they gave to us, we knew that 20% of the total electrical consumption is for lighting. So these values on the left are factoring 20% only of the total electrical consumption, and seeing that, you can see that it has much higher values. If we think about how much the solar panels could offset, and for wall building, it's like 256%. That was my estimation, and that's only if we think about offsetting lighting in the buildings. So here I did the rough estimate for the parking lot. The area was 480 meters square, not too much. And I don't know if we want to connect this to the grid or what would we want to offset this with. So I do not have a comparison with me. However, I just thought about the areas that does not have trees or really close to any buildings. And if you can see, this is a pulled up screenshot from Google Earth to the area I did the calculation for. The next one. I also had Professor Bob send us the new health center, and maybe it would be a good addition to the presentation. So I also did a rough estimate for it. We can see that I also considered the new health center and park for the Hanwha Q cells, the commercial type, because they are more of a big area and a larger system. So these are the estimations for it. And Zoe, if you can please go to the speaker notes, there is a sheet that I would like you to open. It's in the previous cell, the one before, yes. Yes, if you can go to the, yes, this one.
Give me one moment. I'm just trying to figure out how to open it.
If you
it'll let me do it while I'm sharing. What?
Try pressing command and then
there we go.
So this is an Excel sheet that have all the calculations for it. In the upper part, I have the kilowatt, basically the energy calculations. In the next part, I have a rough estimate for the financial calculations. I considered, it was really hard to know how to make a financial estimate for these, but I thought of the systems we want to, how many kilowatt hours these systems, how many watts these systems would produce, and then I multiplied this by the average cost per watt, which I found to be 2.79, and I rounded it to be $3 per watt. And it seemed really expensive. You can look at the data. I don't want to go really specifications. I can at the end, if you have specific questions, talk about this more. But basically, this sheet has can be updated and can be changed later on, and it has a more of a specific estimates and calculations other than the ones in the presentation, basically. So yeah, Zoe, if you go back to the next.
So I do just want to mention again that what we were hoping to accomplish in this presentation is we'd like to, once we're done presenting it, send the presentation to facilities and to anyone in the administration who would like to see it. And it can be presented again, used for any other kinds of proposals, but we do have, like in the speaker notes here, descriptions of what we've talked about today, and also these links to our calculations. So those will all be available when if anyone wants to see them. So I'll go back to present.
All right, so our second of two proposed strategies is piloting an electric transportation program at Bryn Mawr, and obviously this is a very fascinating area of adaptation that can really help us reduce the impacts of climate change. So we took a cost-benefit approach to this as well as our solar panels, and we came up with three main things that we'll be talking about. First are the charging stations that could be installed on the campus. The second is looking at the fleet of vehicles and upgrading them to electric models, at least some of them. And three, investigating the offsets to the current fleet, which Caroline will talk about in more detail later. I'm just going to be looking at the background first. So this slide just talks about the charging station basics. All electric vehicles come with a level 1 charger that can just be plugged into a normal home outlet, which is good for residential users. But once you get up to commercial or everyday use of your car, you really need a level 2 charging station, which requires a 240 volt outlet. So there may need to be some installation costs and maintenance of that to get more power, and this charges the cars at a much more efficient rate and is pretty affordable and spans between residential and commercial uses. And level 3 is there just to talk about charging contexts off of campus. PA has the driving the state forward program, and part of that is looking at ways to reduce the emissions from all engine using vehicles or boats or trucks. So it's a really comprehensive program that is fascinating to look at. All the links are below in the comments section if you want to look at that. And so part of the state's funding provided private companies the ability to make charging stations on the turnpike. So Blink Charging is one company that made 5 locations already on the turnpike. These are DC charging stations, which cost upwards of 6 figures to make, but they are extremely fast at charging and function like a gas station. So we may see these become more popular in the future as more customers purchase electric vehicles. And the next slide is a little bit about the funding. And I didn't have enough time or resources to look at specific quoting or really in-depth costs, because you would need to assess the campus and what electrical infrastructure is there already. But I found a lot of great sources that can help direct the college if it wants to look further into this. The right side shows a figure from the Rocky Mountain Institute, which has a great study on the costs of the charging stations. And we would probably fall between the first and second blue boxes, which is residential on the left and commercial on the right.
and this is for level 2 charging stations. So it'd probably be around $2,500 for one station. And the funding for this in place is actually really great at the moment. Federally, there is no funding available, and to put in context, the Trump administration is rolling back a lot of the Obama administration policies that were encouraging electric transportation in the first place. So it is a little bit of a complex time to figure out whether we should invest in electric transportation or maybe wait it out for other technology. But as far as the costs go for the stations, it looked like a great idea. So as part of the Driving PA Forward program, there's a level 2 EV charging rebate, and the graph on the bottom right shows what cost that would save. Basically, if the stations are public access and you have at least 2 chargers, then you can recoup 80% of the cost of the project, or $5,000 per plug, whichever is the lower cost. And on top of that, since Bryn Mawr is a PICO customer, if they qualify for that rebate, they also get another $500 rebate from PICO. So next, I did a very basic cost benefit analysis just to give Bryn Mawr a little bit of an estimate of what it might look like. Here are 2 of the private companies that have been really successful in spreading around charging stations. Blink, that I talked about before, it's the largest but has no public cost information. You have to contact them directly for a quote. And Enel X is another popular company that offers level 2 commercial chargers. It displays the price right on the website, and they're $13.50 or $13.99 for one of them. And in my assumptions, I looked at the cost of the Enel X chargers. I actually took data from the Rocky Mountain Institute, and they had an average cost of $4,577 for 2 of the chargers, and that seems like a pretty average number to choose. And then I used the level 2 charging rebate for 80% of that cost, and the PICO rebate. And I did exclude costs of electricity, operating costs, and maintenance costs, because we don't have enough information without talking to other people at the moment. But later, Caroline's going to talk a little bit about the operation costs of the charging stations for EVs. And the bottom shows that it would cost $415 to have 2 charging stations. So moving on to electric vehicles, if we have the infrastructure in place, it would be really awesome to look at minimizing carbon emissions from the fleet we have by transitioning to an electric fleet. And so the US Alternative Fuel Data Center is an awesome resource. It has so much rich information on all the models and different types of alternative fuel vehicles, like larger trucks and vans, that we didn't look at in this presentation, but it would be a great place to look at in the far future, in the long term, if this project gets started. So the right shows the context for the energy in PA and nationally, and Bryn Mawr is doing a great job by offsetting its electricity use, but we can see that more projects like Bryn Mawr is taking part in renewable energy might change this picture a lot more in the coming years to put more renewables on this map and make them a bigger chart of the pie. And funding wise, like Kyla said, there is the Alternative Fuel Incentive Grant, and that is a $1,500 rebate if you're living in PA and you buy a alternative fuel vehicle. And the college does qualify for this rebate. And there is a federal credit of $7,500. That's a sliding scale, and the college is not eligible, but I thought it was important to put it in the presentation because other people might consider buying an electric vehicle on their own, not as part of the college, but as part of their own conservation efforts, and that would be a great thing to look at so they can save money too. So the next slide is from the Argonne National Laboratory, and this is just showing the trend of electric vehicles over time. One of the college's concerns is investment. Is this a good idea? and is it the right time? So we can see that the technology definitely is old enough and it has evolved over the decade. But we are seeing a little bit of a plateau, and that might be concerning as to the number of electric vehicles to invest in, and along with Trump's rolling back policy, if it's a good time to invest in the vehicles. And we could just start off with the charging stations first and see what happens in the next coming years with federal policy. And the next slide was just basic data that we were using to start off our cost-benefit analysis of electric vehicles. The left is a list of non-luxury brands, most popular models today that are released, and it shows the incentive of federal credit and the PA rebate, sorry. So we can see that these are great incentives for people outside the college as well that are looking to invest in a new vehicle that's alternative fuel. And while it may be a big jump for the college to invest in a new fleet, we do want to be visible about the project and things that we do on campus as far as conservation efforts to send a bigger picture to the community about responsibility, about sustainability.
Cool. Thanks, Kim. Whoever has access, can I share my screen?
Sure, one moment.
Thank you.
Here you go.
Awesome. Okay. Give me a second.
Before we go on, Liv, you'd had a question that Kyla made a response to, but maybe you want to ask that to the whole group to share your question.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any information about other schools that may have tried to switch to electric vehicles. I don't know if you researched that, and if not, that's perfectly fine, but I was just kind of curious. And the part about the charging station or stations, Kyler already answered that in the chat box, saying they would be for everybody.
I didn't do any research on other schools, but I am pretty sure that Haverford has electric charging stations, and the way they got those was from money they got back from Volkswagen because of that whole thing. Like there's some sort of scandal that they got money back from, the college did, and they invested in charging stations. So I mean, that's, I don't know, it's not really that relevant, but I do know, I think that's true. Jeremy might know about that.
Interesting.
Related to Mena's piece, Rutgers University has a really large solar panel installation on one of their parking lots, and that's used to offset a lot of their electricity use, and it also feeds into a grid.
Yeah, so that would look pretty similar to the picture we had on the slide about putting solar panels over the parking lot, just like they're on a structure and then right over, kind of providing shade for the cars. So.
Sarah asks whether the fact that we're a private campus has an impact. I'm not sure which requirement you meant, Sarah.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically about the PA incentive grants that Kyla's talking about. Just that and maybe because Haverford has these charging stations, they would have experience. But I'm curious about how you make the charging stations available to the public broadly in a space where there are interesting conversations about who's allowed on campus and when.
I'm having a little trouble with my Wi-Fi, so can people hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't know if I have the greatest answer to that question, but we are an open campus generally. So if and facilities might be able to add where this might be able to be placed, but that could, I don't know that there would necessarily be an issue because we're a private college campus.
Thank you.
Great. Caroline, you want to go on?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So now we're just going to be looking at some specifics for vehicle offsets, campus safety fleet transition, because their fleet's very small, and then future goals that we could have. So I'm actually going to move over to my spreadsheet and kind of walk through some numbers here. So bear with me because there's a lot of numbers here. I might just try to make it a little smaller. Yeah. Okay, so this first sheet is the offsets option. And the reason we chose to look at offsets is because there are no alternatives currently on the market for majority of the facilities fleet, like pickup trucks and bigger utility vans that are supposed to come out around 2021, 2022, but there's not a lot of data there. So we chose to look at offsets just as one potential option. And the main number we used for offsets that we got from the facilities fleet expenditure was the gasoline. And that was a net total of $13,000 roughly. So coming down here, I compared this $13,000 to the average gas price in the year 2019. And I used quarterly numbers from Gas Buddy actually, and this was the price of gas in PA, and to get 271. And then I used calculations to convert the total number into gallons. As you can see here, oops, excuse me. This number are the result of these two cells. And then I came up with a number of 95,000 pounds roughly of carbon. And that number comes from, in 1 gallon of gasoline, 19.64 pounds of carbon is produced. And the way that offsets typically work is they're sold or they're purchased by metric tons. So then I converted pounds into metric tons to get 43 metric tons of carbon. And this I used a website called TerraPass, which Victor referred me to. I'm sure there's plenty of offset sources. Yeah, so, and the number that I came up with for price was $474 roughly. And I actually didn't find this to be completely accurate because I looked up a lot of other numbers associated with carbon dioxide. And according to a lot of other areas, the social cost of carbon is actually over $50 per ton. So that if we use the number $50 per ton, that gives you around an offset would be around $2,000, not $500. So I think that it would definitely be important to look a little bit more into the actual damage of carbon and to be a little bit more accurate in purchasing, but this is a potential option and it is a relatively cheap option. As you can see, we'll go through the fleet transition and things as well. But I did also do a hypothetical electric vehicle fleet using a number of 23 miles per gallon and the gallons used above from fiscal year 2019, which would have been 4,800 gallons. And this translates to 3.35 miles per kilowatt based on an electric minivan. And the electric Kona kind of averaged. And that's how many miles per kilowatt hour that those electric vehicles are able to go. So we came up with a value, the total energy cost for an electric vehicle fleet, if this were to have a whole transition for the fleet, and the fiscal year 2019 numbers would only cost about $2,329, while the entire gas cost was $13,000. So that's only 17% comparable to the gas cost, which is a huge difference and a huge savings of money. And then to continue looking more at a social cost, looking at per carbon, we would save about 72% of the carbon if we were to have an entire electric vehicle fleet. And this was kind of just a hypothetical route of numbers that I went through, and I have all the values that I used with the sourcing as well, just to show that an electric vehicle fleet would, in theory, be very beneficial overall once the technology and the infrastructure exists. So here, this is going to be the campus safety transition. So currently the campus safety has 4 Toyota RAV4s. So this model shows a one-to-one comparison of a Toyota RAV4 and the electric vehicle on the market that's comparable, which is the Hyundai Kona. And so all the numbers in the yellow that are yellow can be manipulated, and you can change, and it'll shift this model down here. So if we were to replace the Hyundai or the Toyota RAV4s with Hyundai Konas, we would expect a return on investment after 5 years, which is pretty good. And the numbers here are actually also very generous numbers. I would assume that you should expect to get a better price on the Hyundai Kona with trade-in and discounts, maybe for purchasing multiple vehicles, or sometimes manufacturers just have discounts on vehicles when you go to purchase a vehicle anyways. And the discount that I chose to start with here, which I'm going to manipulate in a minute, adding in the PA rebate of $1,500 that the college is eligible for. This is a rebate that the PA Department of Environmental Protection gives for electric vehicles, which is $750. And then again, as you can see down here, our value of return is after 5 years. So I'm going to go up here and change this discount number here. Oops. And that gives you that number. And then it shows here now, after 4 years, we're going to be saving, and then it gets even better. So then you can, so these numbers can be changed to show better, different outcomes for different vehicles and different numbers that you put in here. And then I also did a net present value comparison, because money today is worth more than money in 5 years. So again, it still shows that we do save after 5 years, just however, the number is a little bit lower than if we were to do just the raw data comparison. And then the last model I ran was looking at minivan transition.
Caroline, before you go on, could you just do the fun thing that if the college was a for-profit business and we could get the full $7,500 rebate, what would happen?
Okay, yes, if we were a for-profit business and we got the $7,500, we would be earning money back right away. It would be a no-brainer as to whether we should switch to electric vehicles or not. It's a crazy difference. Yeah. All right. So looking at the, I looked at the minivan. So the college has a lot of minivans for just campus-wide use, for students to rent, faculty to rent, etc., for trips and stuff. And the one I chose to compare was the Dodge Caravan, and then the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid seemed like the most viable option that I looked at. So in other markets, European markets, the Mercedes-Benz has a fully electric vehicle available on the market, but in the US, this is one of the main electric vehicles on the market. It is a hybrid. It does cost $40,000, and their discount is only eligible for a $500 rebate on plug-in hybrids. And so when I went down to the model and I calculated all the numbers they all ran through, it really doesn't show that much of a, like, it wouldn't really be worth it to go ahead and start this transition, in my opinion, or at least based on the numbers that I ran, simply just because the benefits do not outweigh the costs. And I also did assume that the electric vehicle would be driving on 80% electric and 20% gas, which might be a little bit generous. And the way that I figured that out was by saying that if this electric vehicle has a 12 kilowatt battery, which gives 32 miles of electric charge, and say an average trip would be 40 miles, that's 80%, and the other 20% would be used on gas. And it still didn't show promising numbers, even using those kind of general numbers for travel. So yeah, so I didn't go ahead and do a net present value for this because it didn't seem like it would be worthwhile to purchase these vehicles just yet in our energy transition. So then I kind of came up with some general conclusions for offsetting vehicle fleet. So in 2015, I think it was, yeah.
Oh, can you do the presenter view to make it bigger?
Oh yeah, how do I do that?
Just, yeah.
Okay.
Great,
Yeah, so in 2015 vehicle emissions accounted for 4% of Bryn Mawr's carbon footprint. And with the 43 metric tons that facilities fleet is using of that, and this was in 2019, but the closest number I had for carbon footprint was from 2015, that only accounts for 0.5% of Bryn Mawr's footprint. So I thought that offsets would be generally a good route to go for now, considering the electric vehicle technology is not quite there yet in terms of feasibility for the college. However, the social cost of carbon is much higher, so it could be interesting to look into a more equitable carbon offset source than the one I did, which was TerraPass, which was $11 per metric ton, which seemed very, very cheap. I think the campus safety vehicle transition could be very feasible, especially with trade-in values of vehicles now, as long as the infrastructure for charging stations is implemented on campus. And again, I ran the numbers for that fleet at pretty much a worst case scenario, so it really does look good. And then for the minivans, simply the costs just don't outweigh the benefit. Yeah, so offsets seem to make more sense at this stage in our electric vehicle transition. And I can go into more specifics if anyone has questions about the numbers, but I thought I'd just kind of go through the general gist of it. So yeah, that's all I have. And then we wanted to thank Nina, Jim, Deb, Steve, everyone on the list. We want to give a nice thanks to, because you guys were a lot of help for our data collection and research.